budget workshop to order. Madam City Manager.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and Commissioners. A couple of things I want to bring to your attention. One, Mayor Marks will be calling in, and I assume they will let us know when he is actually on the line to participate in this workshop today. Secondly, I've just been advised that our system is not working, so we will not be able to see some of the PowerPoint materials. However, you do have all of them right here, and anything we need to bring special emphasis to, Raul or Heath will do that. Today, we're conducting our first budget workshop on the proposed operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 2015. The proposed budget presented for City Commission consideration totals $681.1 million, which is $8.1 million or 1.2% of a decrease from our last year's budget. The capital budget totals $103.5 million, and the 5-year capital improvement plan totals $694.9 million. As we slowly recover from the recession that we've been in over the last several years, challenges still remain as we adjust to the new economy. In our first budget update to you in May, at the beginning of the process, we indicated to the Commission that we were facing a $6.2 million shortfall. Subsequent to that, we received updated information, some of which was good and some of which was not so good, that increased our projected shortfall to $7.3 million. As we began this budget process, we wanted to ensure that we were maximizing our existing resources and revenues, as well as recommending changes to policies that would have recurring impacts in future years. And to this end, there are a number of recommendations that utilize reserve funds, that modify the methodology from transfer from several of our utilities, and however, no millage rate increase is being proposed. I will talk to you a little bit more about that as we get down the line, because I think that with there being no millage rate being proposed here, there are some things that you want to discuss that may not be included in this budget. And obviously, that's what we're here for today, is to get Commission input on where you want us to be. This will be the 5th consecutive year of 3.7 mills. As we've indicated previously, the city's millage rate is and will continue to be one of the lowest millage rates among municipalities in the state of Florida. As a result, the recommendations, I'm pleased to report, the proposed budget is balanced currently. Staff will be going over the various budget balancing strategies that are being recommended to you and receiving your feedback on that. The proposed budget is a continuation service level budget, with the exception of accounting services additions. We have 2 positions that have been added to accounting services in response to an audit report that we have received recently, where they are really questioning whether or not we are a little short-staffed in that area. And they'll go into detail about that later this morning. Also, in the administrative budget process, we considered priorities and needs of various departments, and we've weighed those priorities against the resources, and the proposed budget is also recommending 12 positions in our fire department. Now, I think that originally in the materials that you received, we indicated that the positions would be coming online in June or July of next year. Actually, we've talked to the county, and probably we won't need to go there until, because of some changes that have been made in the budget, until October. So probably 3 months later, being conservative. As the Commission is aware, our utility rate ordinances include automatic consumer price index adjustments for our utility rates. The CPI adjustment is included for solid waste, water, sewer, and stormwater, and staff will also talk to you a little bit more about that. I mentioned that there were a number of issues that remain to be resolved that can impact the fiscal year 2015 budget. One of the biggest is, of course, the PBA negotiations and finalizing those. That's still up in the air, and we still have to come to some conclusion on that, and I think we're probably very close to coming to a conclusion on that. As has been the case in the past, we have limited funding for capital projects. We actually thought originally that we would have a little bit more money for capital projects this year, but we really just are where we are. Staff will be discussing that in terms of which priority projects are being recommended to you. We're continuing to be cautiously optimistic about the city's financial circumstances, yet we're still aware that we have areas that we'll have to closely monitor. In my budget message, I mentioned to you that at one point in time, there was some concern about the use of our one-time funding resources, particularly as it relates to the deficiencies fund. Our rating agencies looked at that and said that they had some concern about it. Now, that was when we were down to about a $5 million balance. The commission came forward and very proactively replenished that fund so that we are now at 21 million again, with a policy level of 23 million. This budget does recommend using some of the deficiencies fund one-time revenue, and again, staff will go into that. As we've done in the past, we would like to follow the flagging process for budget issues whereby two commissioners flag anything that you have an interest in having us follow up with, so that we know that there is some interest in pursuing either research or additional information, or adding something to the budget or deleting something from the budget at this point in time. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Raul, who will turn it over to Heath.
And in the interest of time, I'll turn it over to Heath.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Madam Manager. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but you do have the PowerPoint presentation in front of you. I also want to note that we handed out a separate piece of paper that discusses some positions and funding of TPD since fiscal year FY09. That was at the request of Commissioner Miller, but we want to provide each of you a copy of that. I will keep my remarks as brief as possible today so we can get into the heart of the matter, which is discussing the FY15 budget and your priorities for that budget. Briefly, though, to talk about the budget process, obviously, we go back to January for your commission retreat where we identify your priorities, and we take those into account, and we make sure that all departments have those as they prepare and submit their budget requests to the Department of Budget and Policy, the Office of Budget and Policy. And also again this year that we held 2 community budget workshops. Those are great opportunities for citizens to come out early in the process, tell us what their priorities are. We also had an online survey which gave citizens, residents an opportunity to feedback from the comfort of their home or office. As part of the budget message or the budget instructions this year to departments, we asked them to maintain current service levels. What we have done, obviously the city manager has prepared a balanced proposed budget, which is $8.1 million less from last year from total operating. The general fund, however, does increase slightly. In the capital budget, it does decrease, but we do anticipate between now and September that we will be refining some of our revenue sources and bring back some additional capital projects. Real quickly, the growth in the general fund, as the Madam Manager said earlier, there were a lot of give and takes in the process. We had some expenditures go up, but we also had some revenues go up to offset it. Ultimately, what we were looking at is about a $7.3 million shortfall. We identified a modification in the transfer from multiple utilities to the total amount of about $5 million. The remainder of that would be made up from one-time revenue sources, particularly about 2.1 million from reserves, and then we're also looking to anticipated about a 300,000 from deficiency fund to balance the general fund for FY15. As we talk about how we set about balancing the budget for FY15, obviously the key is the millage rate. The proposed budget holds the millage rate flat at 3.7 mils. Again, that's the fifth consecutive year that the millage rate has been 3.7. We did receive preliminary taxable value from the property appraiser on June 1st. We'll receive a final one on July 1st. We did see about a 2.75% increase in taxable value, which translates into about a net of $800,000 to property taxes coming into the general fund. Quickly, I'll point out that on July 9th, we're required at the City Commission meeting to adopt a tentative millage rate, and that will be the day after our July 8th workshop. On slide number 6, we indicate the change in general fund property taxes. You can see year over year. During the recession, obviously, the property taxes were the hardest hit by the recession. We continue to keep the millage rate flat. However, it is important to note that that was a tax savings to many property owners, both homeowners and business owners. Obviously, FY15 shows an uptick into that.
Artist. Dominic, I'm here now. Hello?
Artist.
Hello?
Welcome, Mayor.
Hello?
Hello?
I am here. How are you all?
Fine. How are you, Mr. Mayor?
I am doing wonderfully well. Regret I'm a little bit late, but there were some issues I was having to deal with here where I am. But I'm here listening and ready to participate.
All righty.
Mayor, we emailed you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. If you have that, we're on slide 6 of that.
Go right ahead. I will have it. Okay?
As part of our property tax increase, obviously a portion of that goes to the CRAs. So the total amount that we receive in property taxes is about $1.3 million, but about $400,000 goes to the CRAs. On slide 7, we talk about the use of one-time revenues, and we identify where they're coming from. I want to point out that, as the Madam Manager talked about, we have an ongoing issue of the PBA negotiations. We're not quite sure where we're going to end up with that. The deficiency fund number here of $800,000, that does include potential impact to the PBA negotiations. Without that, the use of deficiency fund would be about $300,000. We also talk about, for bond rating and other purposes, that we want to limit the use of one-time revenues going forward. We have preliminary set a target of 1% of operating, less than 1% of operating. That would be a policy, obviously, that we'd bring back to the Financial Viability Target Issue Committee and the full commission for further discussion during the FY15 fiscal year. On slide 8, in addition to using one-time revenues to sort of make it through FY15, as we have seen some recovery in some revenues, especially ad valorem, which we are so heavily reliant on as our number one funding source for the general fund, we have proposed a modification to several of the utilities transfer policies that would have taken an additional $5 million for FY15. In the budget message, manager's budget message, there's detailed charts in there that you can identify what the change is overall. We've included that on the next slide. The top portion of the slide is the actual dollar amount change, and the second slide is what percentage change is that to the general fund. On slide number 10, we talk about personnel changes. When we were originally putting this together, we had anticipated adding some additional fire positions, which we no longer will add during FY15. That changes the total number of positions from 2,824 to 2,812. Two positions that are currently being requested to be, or proposed being added, are in Accounting Services Division, and they are being proposed to address some prior audit comments. We believe that these two positions will go a long way in helping us to continue to maintain our strong financial position and clean audits. As the positions being requested are part of the allocated accounts, those costs are spread to all funds and not just the general fund. But on page 11, we have provided that it's going to be roughly a $72,000 impact to the general fund next year. Being a continuation budget, it makes it pretty simple of what the adds are. However, as we're balancing the proposed budget, we do have several unresolved issues that we'll get into a little bit. Most of them revolve around special events.
Just a quick question on some of these, one account in particular. On the Star Metro, you all indicate that the revenue is about 6% less than what was budgeted. What's the explanation?
We had, there was two things. There was a modification and some contractual obligations. We're no longer going to be providing services, so we no longer receive the revenue. And then the others were...
Is that the TCC?
There was a little bit of TCC. There was some, I'd have to look in the Medicaid trips. And then there were some other revenues that just weren't coming in as projected.
Talk more about Star Metro. Go ahead.
Are you coming back to the special events, or are you going to touch on those?
I was
Special
actu-
activities, unresolved issues?
I was going to touch a little bit more on
Okay.
those. If you have, like to say anything, I'll go ahead and pause. If not, throughout fiscal year 14, we received special requests, obviously, for different special events, and we wanted to highlight these. These are not currently included. We have a financial viability target issue committee on July 2nd next week, which will be bringing the special events policy. Last time it was adopted, there was some discrepancies between how some co-sponsored events were receiving in-kind services. We want to make that equitable among all of the co-sponsored events. That'll have a financial impact, but we'll bring that back to financial viability and then to the full board, full city commission. Some other requests that have come in, Word of the South Literary Festival, Cost of Freedom Tribute, the Breast Cancer Walk. Those are some things that have been brought to our attention that we want to bring to yours in order to identify priorities. There was also another request for Whole Child to receive an additional $25,000. And then, of course, the Trauma Center funding, I think that's one that we talk about, or at least we have talked about a couple times before, for $75,000, which they use for a state matching grant for a low-income pool to help the underinsured.
Madam City Manager, can I ask a question, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Well, I know we just talked about Star Metro and the budget for Star Metro. As you know, there's one thing that I would like for us to consider very seriously, and that is for our veterans. That is for our veterans, to see if we can offer no-cost transportation for our veterans. Obviously, this is for those who are having problems. That could be those who are homeless or those who have disabilities. But I would hope that some consideration will be given to that in the Star Metro budget.
Just for the sake of discussion, I'll go ahead and ask that we come up with some kind of number so we know what that impact is, so that would be considered flagged, I guess, since two of us have mentioned
Yes.
that.
Okay.
I believe Ivan Maldonado has looked at this particular matter, and I don't know if he has the numbers available at this point in time, but I certainly would appreciate it if he would do that.
All right.
We'll definitely bring that back for the next workshop.
Thank you.
Were there any other comments on the slide 12 or the special events?
I just wanted to clarify something in my mind. I want to, on slide 12, we have the policy itself, but then there are 2 or 3 things, 5, 6 things, and some of these are new and some of these are existing, and the Trauma Center is the existing one. Are any of the rest of them existing?
Whole Child does receive some funding currently. They're requesting some additional funding.
So that's additional. Word of South, isn't that something we agreed to last year, and it was half in 2014 and half in 2015?
I don't think so. This is the Literary Festival.
I know what it is.
Yeah.
That was Tourist Development Council. We agreed to,
Too many meetings.
yes.
Oh,
Okay. That's good. That's good to know.
And this $55,000 represents, I think, the cost of a waiver of services, yes.
And when you say services, do you mean a total waiver of police and solid waste and parks?
It's all
Solid
in-kind
waste.
services.
Right, permitting, solid waste, and police services.
So for clarification, the trauma center, 75,000, is not currently in the budget?
It is not currently in the proposed budget.
And did we provide that funding last year? Don't we?
We did.
It's in our 2014 budget,
Right.
and it has been the whole time I've been here.
Yeah, for the last 3 years, I think, and this is why we bring this up every year, the $75,000 is actually not used for the trauma center anymore. It is actually used to leverage a grant for low-income persons to receive services at the hospital. The county does the same thing, actually, and their $75,000 goes in the same direction. So we probably even need to retitle this. When it first came up, we thought it was sort of a one-year anomaly, and at this point in time, we probably need to call this whatever it actually is.
It should be, because as I recall, it goes back a few years, the a commitment by the city for the funding of the trauma center was replaced by revenue that's generated through the red light cameras.
That's exactly right.
And so, yeah, this is not the best description to use. This is something entirely different, because we do fund through a red light camera revenue the trauma center. To a tune, I think it's 150,000 or so, maybe.
Yeah, the state contributes part of the red light cameras to trauma centers, and then they
Understood.
allocate that out to all
Right.
trauma centers in the state. So, yeah, a couple years ago, we sort of shifted from the model of direct funding to a state providing funding for the trauma centers, and this
Correct.
became sort of a matching funds for the hospital to apply for the state grant for low-income
Medical services.
medical services.
So at this point, for any of these to be considered, we need to have these flagged now, or?
Yes, but just before we finish, whenever you think it's appropriate.
Trauma center, yeah, for me too. Any discussion on the other ones at this point?
May I at least talk a little bit about the whole child request, since I'm not sure.
I think you should have mentioned that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk
Yeah,
about?
well, I mean, we just talked about reclassifying the trauma center money for leveraging health access for poor and more indigent families. And I think Whole Child is in part an extension of that, although they're working in a very specific area. I realize we're kind of budget crunched, but I'd like to sort of flag those two in tandem. I mean, if it comes down to it, maybe 50,000 one way and 25,000 the other way. I think it's consistent with the Southside plan that's been developed. And again, as most of us have seen the map, most of the high-risk health, income, crime indicators are highest in that section of the city where Whole Child is focusing.
I'll flag whole child as well.
Madam City Manager.
Yes.
My concern with this is the assault by the legislature on red light cameras, and desire by some of the legislatures to discontinue the program completely, which then would mean that the funding related to the trauma center may not be there in the future. I just want us to be aware of that and take that into consideration with regards to how we reclassify these funds or how we address the $75,000.
Do we know, where's Max? Max, is it funded this year?
Yes.
Do we know, it is definitely funded this year?
In
Okay.
fact, it didn't, changes to the red light camera legislation was on an even a lower level this year than it hasn't been in previous. I don't think it ever made it out of committee.
Didn't.
Yeah. I think the league's done a good job of defending that.
Yeah, I would agree, but I think I'm just saying let's be aware of the fact that there are those in the legislature who would like to control that, and they're obviously taking some of the money already, violating my opinion of our home rule authority, but that's another issue, but let us be aware of it. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Also, let me note that on the Cost of Freedom tribute is the veterans request, comes from the veterans, and the breast cancer walk The request there, last year, we provided $1,000 to them. It is one of the biggest activities as it relates to these kinds of events that occur. And what they're asking, is my understanding, Commissioner Ziffer can probably address this, is that we actually co-sponsor this event. So it won't be another $1,000, basically. And the $1,000 last year that we contributed, I think we took $500 from budget source and then actually collected money internally.
Yes. So it wasn't, I think we'll probably look for the same this year.
Madam City Manager.
Yes.
Did you refer to the veterans stand down that I think we contributed to that your reference with regard to the
Is
veterans?
that the Cost of Freedom tribute? This is something else?
Would be a different event.
It's different, Mr. Mayor.
What's the cost
All
of
right.
freedom tribute?
I would like to determine whether or not we have actually given any monies to the veterans stand down event. If we have, I certainly would like to make sure that continues.
I know for sure we have provided transportation, and I'm not sure what else we've done, but we'll find out for you and give you details on that.
Thank you very much.
At least 2 years in a row, we did something with the Veterans
Yeah,
Stand Down.
yes, I know we have done something, and I want to make sure we continue at least what we have done in the past.
The Cost of Freedom tribute is where they bring a moving memorial from city to city, and they hold a very large tribute on Veterans Day. And they're asking for contributions from all from businesses, sponsorships, all local governments to help support that effort.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
My question would be, do we have a policy? I mean, shouldn't some of this come before our special events and sponsorship policies, and some of this should come before our human services partnership? We just seem to be ad hoc making decisions on festivals that we don't really know what they are,
We actually have a special events policy that includes the name of every entity that the commission has approved to be a co-sponsor on. And then the rest of the policy requires other entities to pay a certain amount of money based upon the number of people that they bring in and that kind of thing. However, on July 2nd, at your financial viability of the government target issue meeting, we have a proposed policy that we want to bring to the commission on special events, as Heath indicated, to sort of equalize some of the funding. And based upon what feedback we get from you and Commissioner Gillum, we were going to incorporate that, bring it back to the second budget workshop.
I guess my thought, if I could
Go ahead.
close, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I guess my thought is that in budget discussions, what we should do is add an amount to the special events policy that we think is a good amount, an amount to the human services, and then make a decision through whatever our processes are. If it's in the cultural silo, through the cultural plan silo, if it's in the special events silo, through that silo, if it's in human services in that silo, I feel much more comfortable doing that than talking about specific human services amounts and programs and specific events and amounts in the budget.
Right.
Because
And
if so,
typically-
I would have a lot of questions about what these are. I mean,
Right. Typically, that is exactly what we would do. In this particular case, short of the special events policy, each one of these entities have either come to the city commission directly or indirectly, and each one of you have, not each one of you, but different ones of you have asked us to put it on the budget discussion list. So that's why you see it that way.
Just very quickly, just to, if you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, and I'm Commissioner Rowland, I'll get your comment. We had adopted the policy, we had a list, as I recall, but then we discovered, for example, Springtime Tallahassee wasn't even on the list. And so we had come to the conclusion that it needed to be modified, which is, I guess, is where it is now? Okay. Commissioner Miller.
Well, actually, in Commissioner Maddox at my meeting with staff, I said exactly what you just said. I said, I really want a number to be established, and then let us decide, make a decision of how much is going to whom. And if there's money left over for people to come in during the year with unanticipated, they have the right to come in and make a request, but that we establish, this is a budget, we establish a number, and that's the number we try to limit ourselves to, because I am really excited about all the new activity that's going on and all the existing activity, especially in the downtown area. The Downtown Improvement Authority's been working really hard to come up with new ideas, but with every new idea, there's a cost, and with every new idea, there's a request for taxpayers to actually help pay for that. And so we have got to get a little bit more definition here, and I'm hoping that you guys at your financial viability can bring that to the table before our next budget workshop.
Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, the only, I agree wholeheartedly with the comments that are made. There was I think a point at which this was very well taken care of through the
Policy.
Human Services process as well as our policy, and I think we've had a little bit of an erosion of that we probably need to get back to. I would point out an exception on the whole child piece is that the Human Services Funding Partnership doesn't fund these coalitions. There isn't a funding category for it. They don't compete for those agencies that are not doing direct work into the community. If I'm not mistaken, that was the reason why, in addition to the community collaborative that came together, that Whole Child found its way directly being funded through the budget in the first place. So we do a set aside for coalition organizations, and we've had specific requests that have come forward from coalitions before.
For the sake of discussion in our next workshop, I'm going to flag the Word of the South Literary Festival, and maybe just because I've heard enough about it to know that it's going to be a pretty substantial event for the city. So I think from a standpoint of utilizing city services, it's okay with me, but clearly I need support from someone else.
Is this, my thought was that this would come through the special events, is that not? What was the thought around this, Madam Manager? It's an event?
Yes,
Well-
and it is currently totally unfunded. It's a brand-new event,
Right, so
and,
it's not part of the list.
Well, we don't have a list. 'cause
Right.
no
You-
items come forward.
right, you'll have the list on the second.
So you can
Right, what I'm
discuss that
saying
in
is
your
it
meeting?
probably,
You're suggesting that it be a part of that?
I'm suggesting it be discussed and
Okay.
something come forward.
It's very difficult for us at this time because the policy basically is put together based upon things that we already know. We know how many people have been attracted to these events in the past and that kind of thing. So this will be something that'll be in a bit of a different category.
Recognizing that you guys, the two of you, will be discussing it in your meeting, I'll pull my flag.
If it doesn't
We're
come
just
up in
talking about the
financial
policy.
viability.
Yeah,
I think you have a list being presented to you, don't you?
there is a list, but the policy, if I'm understanding what you all are saying correctly, you're trying to get a sense of what all-in support looks like. And so that's all the in-kind stuff that we would normally do. There's a value to it
Yeah.
that we don't really consider right now. It's like, okay, springtime, it makes sense. So a lot of people that come, put it on the list.
Right.
But we don't do the derivative to say how much that.
No, because actually you see that, you see the value of all of those things in your regular budgets, because police, the cost of police, the cost of solid waste, the cost of park and recreation assistance, and the permits associated with all of those things. Sometimes you see it in overtime, sometimes you see it in Star Metro overtime, when it's Star Metro that we're using to provide assistance. So, but there's a cost that we try to provide for each one, an estimated cost. It's not categorized in a special events budget.
I mean, we can clearly work through this, but it seems that if it's an event that we are co-sponsoring, it seems to me that there are a menu of things that ought to come with co-sponsorship. And really, anything less than that, maybe there's a dollar figure associated with it, and you end up on that list.
That's your existing policy right now.
Right, and I think the problem with it is that there are new events that we've not evaluated and
Right,
added to it.
right.
Okay.
Do you want to go over general government capital projects, one-time revenue, page 13?
Yes. Other unresolved issues and concerns, general government capital projects, we continue to use one-time revenues for a lot of those general government capital projects. and we'll talk a little bit more further on in the presentation. But those types of items are just almost ongoing maintenance and routine items at Parks and Rec, being able to resurface tennis courts, the nets, swimming pools, even maintaining facilities here where we have traditionally, many, many years ago, had a transfer from the general fund into capital projects to sort of fund these ongoing. Because of the recession, we've looked to one-time revenue sources. But going forward, we once again will have to look for recurring revenue to maintain the infrastructure that we currently have. We've already talked about one-time revenue. We're looking to address that next year, reducing that. Feedback. I think of late and of new to the topic is South City. There's a plan being developed. Funding will need to be identified to implement that plan as well. I know there's some funding in existing departments. But it's an issue that.
Well, I was going to say, let's be clear, the plan has not been adopted.
No.
It is on the table for discussion.
And yes, that's why it's.
Question there.
I do too.
Was that ever agendaed? I mean, I read in the paper that was a city push and a new direction, but I don't remember ever seeing it on a city commission agenda or commission vote to do that.
And yes, actually, you all agreed to have Commissioner Gillum and Commissioner Ziffer serve as liaisons at a city commission meeting.
For South City,
Well, the initiative, that's actually moving its way through quality of life target issue. We've had a presentation on it, and that's,
I just must have missed it. I don't remember it ever being
It hasn't.
a commission meeting.
Well,
Just
other
like, if
than-
you could find the minutes and get them to me, so I can read up on it.
Do you have a concern about it?
I just read about it in the paper with everybody else.
Okay. No, it was,
I don't know that much about it, so.
and at the time, there really wasn't much to know other than concern about what was happening in that area was brought to our attention through Whole Child and some of the ministers in the area that that particular area was the literally red zone for low birth weight babies and infant mortality and all sorts of other things.
crime.
We've been dealing with the crime for a while. That was not new to us, but some of the other information was. So part of that was the discussion of the development of a plan. The plan has never been presented to you because it's just now it's in draft form right now.
Commissioner Gillum?
I was going to say, I want to sort of expand the flag on this one to not just be South City, but I think, we have of late been, and, last week, Thursday, the city manager and myself participated with Chief Delio in what was a pretty difficult, intense community meeting around this whole issue of gun violence, police involvement there, and then I think through the conversation, sort of lifted the criticism back to one of, well, at the point that we're dealing with gun violence and people shooting at police officers is really not the point where we need to be engaging. I mean, at that point, we've reached, it's deeply troubling, but we've reached sort of a tilting point where folks may be beyond our reach and ability to sort of bring them back into lawfulness. But with that being said, the chief pointed out some really staggering statistics. The fact that in the state of Florida, out of all cities, the city of Tallahassee is second in the highest crime rate, only to Miami-Dade County. That means over Orlando, over
Violent
Duval
crime.
County.
Violent crime?
Violent crimes, over Duval County, over Broward County. I mean, there's so many places in the state you would think that we would be far behind. And it's a real issue, and I'm really glad that at least in the South City plan, we've been able to convene a number of stakeholders and try to come up with some really specific ways to get at this. But I do think, this is a much broader issue. I definitely don't think the end-all, be-all solution is going to be TPD or even the new addition of new officers. I think, there's a need there, and we have to determine how we're going to address it. But there are other much more, I think, pivotal points, smart investment points that we should really be intersecting this problem. And so the chief has reflected on a couple of community plans that he's evaluated so far in his 5 months of tenure. one of which he called to my attention, which is one they pushed out in New Orleans, Louisiana, which, as many of you all know, was at one point murder capital of the world, as it was described. And through a collection of activities and community engagement, they've seen a dramatic decrease in violent crimes and the crime rate in general. And there are some, I think, really smart suggestions that we probably could bear listening to and maybe giving some leadership to in our own, in our own city. And so what I would do is I'd like to flag typically, I think if you add something to the budget, the idea is to try to work with the staff to identify some way to pay for it. But I'd love to just flag a portion of money I would throw out there for discussion, 100,000, that we would, and again, this would not be in new officers, but it would be segregated so that whatever the money ends up being expended toward is a smart strategy that gets us to a certain end conclusion. I'll just add in there that the work we have been doing at Palmer Monroe was just assessed by the Department of Juvenile Justice. And of the 80 or so programs they evaluated for funding, the Palmer Monroe Teen Center was ranked #1 comparatively across all of those programs. So there's something there that says that when we put our heads to it and we try to reckon with this stuff, we can figure it out. But I think that's a drop. I mean, I think that effort is just one of probably several to be undertaken. One that they have explored in the New Orleans plan is a midnight basketball program where they have identified high crimes taking place between certain age groups, between a certain set of time of evening, and have put the energy into structuring something that occupies their time. They've got a national forum on youth violence. They've got a youth employment program, both summer and year-round, which, we heard that consistently on Thursday. Jobs, opportunity, people need access. I don't think we're the only solution to the problem. I think the United Way probably has a role here. The county has a role here. But I don't think it is smart to just sort of sit back and let this be put at the feet of our police chief and police department and think that that's going to resolve this in any real way. And I know that we probably have had different approaches at this, right? We can probably all go back to our time, mine, 11 years on the city commission, and Commissioner Maddox probably long before that, of where we have had fits and starts of this. What I think is smart about at least what we've seen detailed in the South City plan is that it is consistent. It approaches this problem from a lot of different directions. And you're finally, I think, certainly by virtue of 2 weeks ago, the event we had on that weekend, starting to see the kind of community engagement that's going to be necessary in order to sustain this work. We're not going to be able to do it ourselves, but I think we can be part of the linchpin that gets it started. So I'll stop there, but I did want to flag the opportunity for setting aside money that, again, if we don't identify something smart to do with it over the next budget year, don't spend it. But if we do, then at least we've got a pot of resources there beyond police and the police budget that we can do something with.
So are you suggesting that we assign that $100,000 figure to that? And does that include the whole child $25,000? Just for argument's sake here.
It can if we don't find the resources. But I would say just in general, and I think without making too much of a delegation of which agency or which group or what the ultimate end goal. And again, if the plan isn't smart, and I would suggest even to go further, that it be a plan approved by the commission ultimately.
Well, as it moves to our target issue, that's where it'll eventually end up.
Absolutely, that it be eventually approved by the commission, but that once approved, that there are at least some resources there to kick things off.
Mayor.
Yes, sir. Yes, Mayor.
I really want to endorse this discussion. I've heard some startling statistics lately.
Mayor, you're garbled a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
better?
yes.
How about, I've heard some startling statistics regarding this, and that is African-American males make up 6% of the population, but over 30% of individuals incarcerated.
Is that in Tallahassee, or is that,
That's nationwide.
oh,
And we are seeing an epidemic of major proportions throughout our nation, and South City is symptomatic of that epidemic. And so I wholeheartedly endorse what we're doing, and I would suggest maybe even more funds be so we can address this issue. And let us not forget that South City is the neighborhood du jour right now. We have the Holton Street area. We have the Alabama Street area. All of those two areas, too, have these same issues. And if we don't begin to address these in a very positive way, it's not going to be a good thing. Commissioner Gillum mentioned New Orleans, Louisiana, and Mayor Mitch Landrieu. I've discussed this issue with Mayor Landrieu and what he is doing in New Orleans. And he is really taking an aggressive approach in terms of addressing the issue related to black males in this nation and what is happening to them. This has been a serious topic of discussion at the United States Conference of Mayors meeting while I've been here. I've got to tell you, it really is serious, and I'm very proud to see that we're taking an opportunity to address it, but I think we may have to be even more aggressive with it. I flag it. Thank you much.
Commissioner Miller.
Actually, the mayor's comments were segued into one of the asks for information that I had. There are several pages in this report on crime stats, but they're standalone, and I have no way to understand how this compares to citywide, countywide, statewide. So that I didn't have a frame of reference in a sense. The other thing is that I would like to see these recommendations, a lot of these recommendations go directly to the source of the problems. Obviously, it's not in our purview to really address low birth weight babies, but we can certainly provide a lot of education and support and other things. But a lot of the suggestions in here had to do with, they were fairly easy to implement, Safety Education Day at Sunrise Apartments.
A lot of it has to do with the things that we already do.
Exactly.
Some
That
way,
was
right.
my point. I think that we have probably want to commit extra staff time to this area to address these particular issues like the neighborhood services coordinator. But just lighting, more improved lighting. The city owns a tremendous amount of, well, not a tremendous amount, but several properties there. In the past, we've had the Neighborhood Renaissance Partnership, and they produced the Arena Center in one of those pieces of property that the city had. I wasn't part of that at that time, but I've always admired that program, and I know that you're really heading back toward recreating that here. In that case, there was a lot of private sector involvement, and these aren't problems that we can solve by ourselves. So I'd like to have some opportunity to revisit some of the premises of the Renaissance Community Partnership, the elements of implementation there. A lot of the government's part is already, I believe, included in the document.
Yeah.
And how did they reach out to businesses and so on?
And I can tell you that our business community is interested in this.
I'm sure they are.
I've had some conversations
not
with Sue Dick and others who
Pained.
indicated to me today even that she would like to have someone from representing the city to attend their next meeting. Ben is here. I don't know whether you've even had that conversation yet, but I think they have an upcoming board meeting tomorrow. And apparently, there's been enough concern and questions asked by the business community that they would like to have Chief DeLeo actually make a presentation to them.
The CNRP partnership is still in place. It's still intact. Most recently, over the last few years, mainly having to do with Appalachia Ridge Technology Center, which
Right,
is
exactly.
slowly evolving.
And that was, I'd like to repeat that.
And so we can certainly engage. Johnny, you're still involved, are you not? Yes, he is. So we can
Good.
certainly bring them into that discussion.
Well, as Chief DeLeo said, the police come in at the end of the story, and by the time they get there, you really missed a lot of opportunity to try to intervene. And ideas like the night basketball and that sort of thing are really the kinds of things that we're going to have to look at, put together a package that really goes directly to the problems, which are rising crime rates and that this has just really gotten to be a very difficult place for the residents to live who are, I mean, there's so many committed residents who really want, they are asking for help. And it seems to me that they are coming forward to assist in the solution. But I think having a very solid neighborhood organizations and communication amongst the neighbors, I think that's going to be the basis for the solution to this problem. And then we see what, as you have. The report's really excellent. I don't think we can quite do every single thing in it, but a lot of it, as you said, is already in place and just ongoing city activities in general, so.
Okay, Commissioner Gillum?
Yeah, the only thing I would exclamation mark is the coalescing, I think, of the business community and the rest of the philanthropic community.
Right.
Madam Manager, like you, have also had some of those calls where to me, it is finally getting to a point where I think people say, regardless of geographically where some of this stuff happens in the city, to be second highest in violent crime in the state is bad for the university community, is bad for the business community, is bad for the reputation of the city as a whole. And so I do think we've got some of the right elements of people getting on. And what I think the biggest role the business community can play will be with some of these apprenticeship, mentorship, and job offering opportunities. And so that's what I'm saying, that the plan will have to be very complex and extremely encompassing because we won't be able to do it by ourselves. I think all of us know that. Even if we wanted to and had all the resources in the world, we couldn't. So.
We
Wait,
clearly have, but if we could contain this to one more comment, Commissioner Miller, and
Yeah,
then we'll
that's
move
fine.
forward.
It's very quick because it was really one of my main points from last time that I failed to make. I'd like to see these things prioritized, given a rank, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, on affordability, how complicated it would be, how many things can be just instantly taken care of. Either they're easy or they are highly important. And
Already
if-
funded.
I figure you probably did, but that's the way I think I would feel more comfortable trying to approach it that and do some bite-sized piecing to not have this whole thing land in this year's budget because it's pretty comprehensive.
The next item on the list is the need for additional police officers, which we've talked about. Not originally part of the proposed budget, but as part of the manager's message that she did point out the need for additional officers and a plan for funding that. For FY15, it would be the deficiencies fund, and then looking for the reoccurring ad valorem to support that in the years going forward.
Flag.
Flag.
So done.
The next slide, we presented this to you at the May 28th meeting, and it shows you where the top 4 expenditures are for the general fund. And one of the things as we look at it as options of if we don't want to modify transfer policies, if we don't want to use one-time revenues, the other options are to reductions in service and staffing. And so we wanted to sort of highlight this. Obviously, law enforcement and police have become a very high priority. And so when you start looking at the amount or the shortfall for the general fund, if you exclude law enforcement, obviously that takes a big portion out of the pot that you have or the pie that you have to cut from. So what would start out as about a 6% cut, if you were to exclude police, it becomes almost a 9% cut. And more importantly, throughout the years, we have reduced staff. We've reduced as many functions as we can. On the next slide, we talk about position.
I need, if I can just ask a quick question, because, and to pinpoint where the narrative was, where it's mentioned, it was, the quote was, the line was maintain current service levels. My question is, do we go through a process every year rather than suggesting to our individual departments to maintain current service levels? Do we reach out to all our different departments, not only emergency services and police, fire, and so on, but all our departments, to find efficiencies? In other words, instead of looking towards maintaining current service levels, it's almost maintaining current service levels, but are there more efficient ways for us to do that? Or are there things that we're doing we don't need to do anymore? Do we go through that process every year?
During the year, as part of the budget process, we're always looking to do things faster, better, cheaper. And I think I know Raul's got the Kronos, the My Time project, where we talk about some efficiencies to be gained. He's been more involved in that than I have.
So we're going to have that shortly, or are you going to talk about
The
that?
Cronus.
Well, as part of our operations, we're continually looking at ways to maximize efficiencies. The Kronos project is one where we currently have about 150 timekeepers in the organization. Not that they're doing timekeeping 40 hours a week, but part of their jobs is to do timekeeping. By automating that process, you free up that time to either reallocate those resources for other needs, or through attrition, you're able to eliminate some of those positions. So as part of our budget process every year, we look at things, where can we maximize efficiencies? We've brought a number of things to the commission over the last 6-7 years since the recession started. I mean, we've consolidated management of neighborhood centers and parks and recreation centers because we knew they were in close proximity, and it made more sense to have one set of management for all the facilities instead of individual management for for each individual facility. We have downgraded positions from department directors. We've eliminated department directors by consolidated departments. So over the years, we've done a lot of efficiencies through the budget process in order to address our resource issues. And if you look over the last 9-10 years, the general fund has only grown about 0.6% when CPI has been almost on average 2.1%. So if you look at the bar chart, general fund has been pretty flat, in part to some of the efficiencies that we've created, some of the changes that we've made in the budget process on the expenditure side. When you look at it now, the issues that we're facing are really revenue issues. We just don't have enough revenue to maintain the services that we've had that are offering the community, services that the community has told us they don't want to see cut, services that we've created efficiencies and try to minimize costs of those through the years.
Yeah, I'm not altogether sure the community really wants us to raise utility rates either, but, and so I guess what I'm asking is, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time here, but maybe you could supply us, how we look at those efficiencies every year, and particularly this budget cycle, because we're going to be making a pretty hefty increase in that transfer. And before we do that, at least I'm going to want to make sure that we've been reaching for every possible efficiency. And I know that we've made an awful lot of changes since 2007, 08, but that doesn't mean we have to stop now. So if you could supply that, I'd certainly like to see that. Sorry.
Well, I have a question on the, I agree with Commissioner Ziffer on that too. As you knew, I was going to ask you to bring this up because I want to make sure that my real concern is that we look at the programs that are working and make sure that we keep funding the programs that are working, and that we have a feedback loop to make sure that we're funding adequately. I mean, we may have programs that we should fund more. And which ones are those? How do we identify those? And that's really where I think, at least I would like to see more across-the-board discussion, and maybe that can be spread over the entire year next year somehow, because it's pretty in-depth. On this chart that you handed out to us, I see you've explained to me about the non-sworn, the sworn officers have been consistent over the last several years. The non-sworn have been moved to the Joint Dispatch Center. You explained that to me, but also my question is this: the total budget, does this total budget somehow include the money that we are providing to the Joint Dispatch Center?
Those funds are not in the police budget. They're in the general fund, but actually they're in my budget.
So we have, well, I guess the difference, it looks like the operating expenses are about the same. So we didn't have any gain and any benefit specifically in operating expenses when those 30 positions were moved over to the Joint Dispatch Center.
We simply reallocated the expenses from the police department to another line item in the general
I know,
fund.
but it didn't drop. The total budget didn't drop.
For TPD?
The staffing personnel costs dropped slightly, but not very much. The total budget stayed pretty much the same. Anyway, if you'd provide me in between now and then with a little bit more color to that picture. Thanks.
You're saying the TPD budget or the
TPD
consolidated
budget,
dispatch?
Since they did have such a significant, I mean, I saw this and said, well, good enough, Lord, what happened, 120? Then I read the note, and said, okay, we've moved these people, the non-sworns, to, down to joint dispatch, and yet I didn't see that, any savings in the operating expenses, I guess is really my point, and not much savings in the total personnel cost.
Thank you. Heath?
Commissioner, can I make a comment on this point? We're
Mayor.
talking about the capital budget, I assume, at this point in time. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, good. And what we intend to do with it, I'll make my, I guess, normal pitch that we begin to embrace the technology that's available to us. I think we're doing some of that, but I think it's going to be critical future that we continue to realize what we can do with the new technology out there, and keep that in mind throughout this budget process, and to determine how we can reduce our costs, reduce the number of personnel we have regarding that. So we can discuss that later, and I certainly will bring it up again at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
On page 15, when we talk about positions all fund, I just want to make a note again that for FY15, that number was including the 12 firefighters, so that'll drop back down to 2,812 positions, total positions. And for the general fund, it'll just bump that up by 2 positions. On page 16, we have provided an historical chart of the general fund. Again, the big changes, well, not so big changes, the millage rate staying flat, the using the use of one-time revenue as well as the transfers from utilities to balance for FY15. And now this does include a 2.5% for employees. The PBA negotiations are still pending out there, and that will have an impact on FY15 as well.
Just for one moment, excuse me. Commissioner Mannix, do you have a time issue?
Yeah.
Okay, and do you have anything you'd like to particularly bring up at this time?
I think we're good with what we flagged. I mean, I know we're going to have many more of these.
If there's anything in particular now, since you have to go,
The police issue was a big one with me, but we've already flagged those. The special events policy we'll deal with in financial viability. So,
Airport?
good. Oh, the airport, is ongoing, but as far as budget, there's not a whole lot.
Are you going to come back with some good and positive information about airport? I hope so, too.
At some point.
You going to bring them with you?
Thank you.
He's going to go work on the budget.
Yeah.
Good.
You're right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Travel safely.
Thank you.
If we're ready to move on to the enterprise funds, we'll start with building inspection. The highlight here is it is balanced once again. Apparently, there was a loan from the deficiency fund to the building inspection. They have made repayments to the deficiency fund, and in the pro forma, they account for a repayment in every year, which means that we anticipate the revenues to exceed their expenditures to allow for that repayment to the deficiency fund.
And this year, we have $165,000 coming back.
We anticipate by year end that will be repaid. Obviously, as we get closer to the closeout, hopefully that number will go up. And they're down to about $1.1 million that they owe the deficiency fund. The fire fund, obviously that number at 15 needs to be adjusted down because of the 12 positions not coming on board until FY16. So that'll drop, and we'll revise those numbers for next go-around. But obviously a new fire fee study is being conducted during fiscal year 15. Electric is balanced in all 5 years. The CPI, we're anticipating that it'll be around 2%. Obviously, we do an August to August CPI calculation, so we'll know that in the next couple of months of what we anticipate that October 1st number to be, but right now it seems to be right around 2%. With the
Just a quick question. So on fire, the new station is what we anticipate costing over $3 million? Is that what the increase would have been that is now being delayed?
No, their staffing If you include staffing, there's some staffing cost. There's also some additional debt service costs that they're picking up because of the station and their portion of the Consolidated Dispatch Agency.
Did we didn't start paying for that station early?
The debt service for it? No.
Okay. This is the new station, not the,
New station.
Station 16.
okay, got it.
Maybe I'm not clear.
This is the Weems Pond.
There's one new station,
Weems.
and it's at the Joint Dispatch Center, correct?
Weems.
Based on the new modification to the transfer policy that we're proposing, it would require an additional $3.9 million from the electric fund. The gas fund, it also is balanced in all 5 years. Based off of what we're requesting the proposed budget, it would show an increase of $213,000 to their transfer. Water is also balanced all 5 years. The change to the transfer policy would require an additional $483,000.
Mr. Mayor, can you hear us?
Yes,
Okay.
I can. I'm listening. I can hear you very well. I got you all on a squawk box kind of a thing, and you're coming in loud and clear.
Okay.
Sewer fund, again, balanced all 5 years. You'll see a slight decrease. There was some change in the budgeting formula. We do anticipate for some of the underground, we're working on their capital projects. I think some of their capital projects we'll see an increase in that, but we'll talk about that, how that impacts debt service in the pro forma. You won't see a lot of that for FY15. The airport, no issues, a balance in all 5 years. Star Metro, we have it balanced in all 5 years. They are still currently working diligently to achieve their savings. We don't expect to realize the full savings in this fiscal year. In addition to the savings and expenditures, we had some unexpected revenue issues come up, which have caused an increase for FY15. But we do hope between now and September that we can identify some additional savings and bring back a new number.
But we've had a decline in ridership since the changeover, correct? And as I recall, I mean, we projected that we'd have some decline, but at what point do we project that decline is going to even off and start to increase again? Because we're spending more and fewer people are using it.
I don't have that information, but I can
Get it
ask
for the
Ivan.
next
We can get it
meeting.
for your next meeting if that's okay.
Well, at some point, and I know that our Star Metro people are looking whatever we can possibly do, but if we need to be doing something entirely different, I know I'm talking about a complete changeover like we did before, but if we need to make some changes, we want to clearly deliver service to the folks that need it more than anyone else. Let's continue to, deliver the services to the people that are going to, A, use it and also need to use it. And I just, whatever information you can provide would be helpful. Commissioner Miller.
Well, I have a certain level of concern with the days that we give free ridership, because I know that it probably doesn't cost very much, but just on a general policy, I'm not sure exactly why that we do that. I know that at some point, maybe we should, if there is an area where we're trying to get people back and forth to Jack McLean, especially in the summer, we're offering these ability for kids to ride for a lower amount, we ought to budget for that ahead of time instead of, and I don't, maybe you did, I don't know.
We did.
You did? Did you really do that?
Yeah,
That's
I
just
mean, we
wonderful.
did, but even still, the revenue was down.
Okay, well, I think that was just my main request. If we're going to do this, if we're going to have a Veterans Day free, or even all the homeless veterans, or veterans in general, I mean, I'm sure that that's not going to be a huge impact to the bottom line, and I agree with the mayor that that's something that I would like to support. But just add it all into the budget, into the numbers, and make sure that, because it sort of caught me by surprise. I thought, well, we had a budget, I don't know if it was incorporated even last year, so I guess that would be my
And
ask.
part of the issue, Rick, where are you? Are you here? Part of the issue, come up for a second. We identified some potential savings in Star Metro, and we hope to implement them immediately. I can't remember exactly why we weren't able to get them moving. I know we had some federal requirements in terms of public hearings, so we didn't get to the process until probably March or April. So we're seeing just the savings. We had anticipated savings that would start almost immediately.
Yeah, the primary delay was really on our part in trying to make sure that we address the customers that were be affected. So we spend a lot of time on the buses, talking to them on an individual basis, trying to make sure that everybody was addressed, their issues were addressed. And I think that delayed us through March. It was a success. I think it was money well spent because it allowed us to understand what people wanted. And one of them was the CK Steel stop. Everybody wanted that bus coming down Macomb to divert to CK Steel, and said, okay, well, let's do it. And that brought a lot of goodwill. I mean, just one single change, all the other changes have been successful. I think ridership is actually up on the regular routes and down in the student side.
Right.
But I think the contract with FSU is going to address that. So we should see some changes. Now we're addressing the dollar ride, and again, the users of the dollar ride, and trying to see how we can improve that. So.
And actually, it may be probably, I was thinking that in the next 2 to 3 months, we might be able to have a better projection of where we actually are, but we'll have some still, because we're in the summer, we're going to have some downturn on the student ridership. So probably in the early fall, we ought to be able to come back with something that makes a lot of sense in terms of where we actually are with all the changes made.
And the loss of the Medicaid contract, or the Medicare contract, is really, from a revenue side, it's a non-issue. It does reduce your revenues, but at the same time, it reduces expenses. That's not something that the city made any money on. It's basically money coming in and money going out. So it should be a decrease on both sides.
Commissioner?
Yeah,
Let me say something. Commissioner?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
I want to thank Commissioner Miller, and I'm sure I can thank all of you all with regards to the free transportation on our system for our veterans. I think we have to look at this not from the cost standpoint, but from the advantages that we will achieve as a result of some of our veterans being able to access services that they so sorely needed. Hopefully, it will result in some of our veterans getting jobs, some of our veterans getting the right kind of health care that they need. There are some statistics related to that I can provide for you so that we will see that there is a significant benefit. And understand, although I would want to apply to all veterans, I never will use it. I probably never will use it. And I doubt that the vast majority of veterans in our community will use this service. So it really is aimed at those who are disabled or those who are homeless, and they're the ones that we need to target. And I feel certain those are the ones that are going to be using it the most. And other statistics indicate that it's not very costly at all. So I will wait for Ivan to give us the numbers, but this is something that I think we all can support. And I feel pretty good that we can do this. Thank you.
Commissioner Gillum?
So on the outside counties, how are we doing contracting? Let's take Gadsden, for instance. I understand that the route that we run there is pretty well utilized. Are you looking at any expansions? Wakulla?
Yeah, and that's
Jefferson?
obviously by contract.
Right.
So we don't run it, but see, it goes through the planning process, and right now we're not.
But, wait, let me just understand. But whatever revenue is generated off of that is inured to Star Metro, is that right or no?
It goes back to the operating cost of the program.
So it doesn't.
We have an administrative
Let me get you
fee.
an answer on that, because
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
we collect some sort of a fee. I'm not sure whether it's 15% of the contract or whatever for administering.
Not sure, I'll let you know.
And then as a follow-up, if you could tell me, based on our ridership, if every one of our regular riders were to pay for an annual, if you were to divide the cost of what we get in revenue off of it, not what we lose, the $7 million we supplement, but if you were to deal just with the amount you would get if you divided the cost of the service by the number of riders into an annual pass amount, whatever number that is. I'm curious to know what that would be. I've seen some communities who have done the math on what it costs to run a system. They figure out a way to get that, and then the system's pretty much free to anyone else. I don't know that's where we're going to go. I'm curious to know whether we're running a system that's sort of topped out at a ridership, and we could figure out mathematically a way to get what we needed, and then radically expand the number of people taking advantage of the service.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing, the variable that it seems to me when it comes to Star Metro is $4 a gallon for gasoline. As I recall, several years ago when we hit that plateau, our ridership levels went up. It's like the magic number for a lot of people. So it seems to me, contrary to, giving away free rides, it seems to me that if we're going to give free rides, let's give it to those people that could potentially be new customers for us, to get them to at least sample, because gas is going to go above $4 a gallon. It's headed there because of clearly some of the instability that's in the Middle East. So it seems that there's an opportunity for us to reach out to those folks that could potentially be new riders. And I'm sure your department's doing that, but I would suspect these Star Metro numbers will increase just simply because of those factors, which I'm sure you've looked at.
Do we have passes that people can buy that are just monthly passes, regular people, not students?
Yeah, we have a lot of different, a variety of passes, including a student summer pass. That's pretty reasonable, so they could ride.
Yeah, I knew about that one. I was just wondering, business people type folks.
Yeah, we have a discount if you buy a quarterly pass or whatever. It's a little less expensive than the daily
When
amount.
you have the pass, you can ride as much as you want to all over town?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Heath, solid waste?
Is balanced, and the transfer modification would be an additional $200,000. Stormwater is balanced. We are requesting a waiver to a policy for the fund balance. Obviously, they have a lot of issues that they anticipate coming down the pipeline, that they are going to have an expenditure plan to use all that they have in their reserve. Gulf Fund is balanced. Cemetery is balanced. They continue to look for new revenue streams. And that was quickly a summary of what the enterprise funds look like. If there's any questions about those before we move into capital.
Commissioners, any questions?
Just how energetically are people on the cemetery fund looking for new options for revenue? Because it seems like we've got a tremendous amount of city-owned property, and we're basically out of space, so especially in several. So let's move forward with that.
We're pushing it. We haven't moved fast enough in the
I need to buy a
past.
plot. We need to get on with this so we'll have a good place.
Hopefully you're not going to need it quite yet,
I hope
Commissioner.
not.
If I could, we can go ahead and just skip ahead to page,
Are you all okay?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Anybody need to take a break?
For capital?
Okay, let's move forward.
Okay. We'll try to wrap this up. Moving forward to the capital budget. And I said it earlier in the presentation that we've relied on existing resources, reallocating from projects that close out with additional funds and moving them to new projects. It has limited the amount of additional capital or reliance upon issuing debt in order to fund capital projects. On page 32, we start with Public Works, and we can see that they've for FY15, they have about $8.5 million worth of projects. The highlights are there. We continue to find resources for street resurfacing and residential sidewalks. The real limited resources come in on the next page for Parks and Rec. They consistently ask for about $1.5 million of funding. But due to limited resources, this year we're only able to fund them $600,000. Last year, I think it was $700,000. The trend continues to go down. We have a new contract with Leon County where they're going to pay for 50% of capital. So we do have $75,000 for the Animal Services Center, which will be matched by the county. Fire has several projects, which will be dependent on the new fire services fee getting funded in future years. Utilities has their projects for maintenance and refurbishment. And quickly, if there's any questions about capital, we'll talk about the next steps. July 8th is currently our next scheduled City Commission budget workshop. The following night, July 9th, we'll be asking to adopt the tentative millage rate. September 10th is our first public hearing, and our last public hearing will be September 22nd. And that concludes my portion of the presentation.
May I throw one thing out? Maybe Commissioner Miller is going to do that already. I see that look on her face. One of the things that we have a big concern about is our very limited capital budget for the future. Was that where you were going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, every year I'm at the same place where you can't go on ignoring these needs. It's just, if your roof was leaking, would you just let it continue to leak and say, I got to put this off? Well, first thing you know, you've got to replace all your ceilings in your house and everything else. I have a big concern here. I'm at the point where if we can't afford this, I mean, even to the point of really seriously looking at options of whatever you suggest. I mean, you guys are the ones who figure out where money comes in and out. I mean, I can make some suggestions, but I'm starting to really get another level of concern this year. We've got a lot of need in this area, and, we never have enough money to do it.
Having said that, would it be possible for, and I agree, because every year you have brought this up, and I think every year that
Well,
we have.
remember, we had a workshop, and we had a wonderful presentation from Public Works, but our road condition index is not at a critical level yet, but citywide, it's just trending downward and downward and downward, and we've got to reverse the trend at some point.
If we could perhaps get a priority order of, I know it's not funded, but what those items would be
Right.
in some order, so that we could at least have a discussion if there are alternatives for us to moving forward on some projects. I don't think any of us want to have that leaky roof that's going to cause the roof to cave in, or roads that deteriorate to the point where it costs, 10 times as much to fix as it would if we
Right,
take the.
exactly,
Right.
that's my point.
And, we've created an awesome wonder in Cascades Park. It is an awesome wonder to maintain.
Yes, it is.
And we want it to stay as beautiful as it is right now. It can't be any less of a standard. And it requires a lot because so many people come through there. So,
Absolutely. So perhaps we could come up with what, if we had a priority list, what that would be.
What are our options?
Yeah. And yes, funding options. So if I recall correctly, typically at this time, I'll give each commissioner an opportunity to discuss anything specifically unless they've already discussed what their intentions are. Commissioner Miller?
Well, I think we have, all my comments have been already expressed.
I would just say on the capital budget, I think the list would be helpful. I'll say in my mind, I've always thought of it as we've been able to address a lot of our citywide capital needs through Blueprint 2000. And I don't know how the staff squares that, but, a significant amount of money gets generated off of that. When it comes to sidewalk construction and road construction and reconstruction, we've gone there in order to fund that generally. And that from a department standpoint, my guess is that folks are on an annual basis identifying what the future needs will be and are ciphering away enough money that over time, when it comes to maturity, you'll be able to make that expense. So if I'm viewing that incorrectly, I'd love to hear, staff's response about the city's capital plans, because, like I said, most of the capital work that we've been able to see come out of the ground or reinvest in has come through Blueprint. And so, which has been an extremely helpful venue, because outside of that, and this commission's desire not to increase ad valorem taxes, which is the only other way we're going to get money into the capital budget in order to fund capital projects, That's kind of the only way at this is where we've got dedicated funding already coming into the government through Blueprint 2000. But am very open to hearing you all's thoughts about how you approach the capital budget in the city in light of Blueprint.
And Commissioner, I think you're correct. I would agree with you in every aspect of what you said, except that you hope that we are ciphering away money to address some of the kinds of things we really are not. We're doing certain kinds of things like our fleet reserve and that kind of thing for large equipment, but we have been trying to address on an annual basis the major renovation needs of various facilities that already exist. So new capital projects are one thing, but I think the focus on maintenance is a big deal for us right now.
And so I think, maybe one way forward, obviously there's a revenue side of this, which, we all are aware of what that is. But we're going to have to get back to a process where we are at least being able to allow the manager to budget for, these needs that come up over time.
One of the things that we've been paying attention to in the past several years, for example, our community service centers, most of them are 40 and 50 years old.
Yeah.
So, the majority of them are. So we have patched, we have fixed erosion issues, we've done all sorts of things, we've relined pools, we've done all kinds of things, but we're getting to a point where some of the buildings just really are not in the kind of shape that we would expect them to be.
So by way of a follow-up on the Blueprint piece, I know we've gone through and identified what our priorities are within our segment of the money. Are we beyond going back and saying we would like to segregate $10 million for infrastructure upgrades on what currently exists in city buildings and other city infrastructure? Are we beyond that point?
I think we are on the 10%, on the city's 10%.
Yeah.
You all made some recommendations, but that's pretty much up to you at any given time.
It would seem to me that if we're able to, assuming the citizens see the benefit and authorize the continuation, that ought to be the first place. We've already been able to include in that some of the maintenance money on the parks. We also have included in there a pretty robust sidewalk building program.
Yes.
I would add to it a city infrastructure, piece, and that deals not with new infrastructure, but the upkeep and maintenance of what we currently have. Now, that, of course, is only a short-term solution, right? We
Right,
still got to
right.
get back to the budget, and I think that's something that this commission will have to reckon with, which is what are going to be the normal recurring sources for this.
Commissioner Miller?
As you may remember, when we were having our talk about what was important to include in that 10%, I really felt that road maintenance needed to be included there at some fixed amount, so that we can budget for it and we can plan projects from here to there, and we'll know that this is under control, because I have a big concern, as you are probably all tired of hearing me say this year after year. So thank you for it.
Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments?
Yes, I really do. I think everything that you all have said is really right on point in terms of what we have to do and for the capital budget, as well as operation and maintenance expense as well. I want to focus on, as I've said in the past, I want to focus on how we can really reduce our expense and expenditures. And I think we have an opportunity to do that. I think with the network that we have in place, including our smart grid system and the other things that we have in place, we have an opportunity to really get ahead of this thing and reduce the expenses significantly. The issue, however, as I've discussed with the manager before, is how do you get there and how do you get the funds necessary to utilize those technologies that are available to us, because they can be, there's no doubt, they can be expensive. But I would dare say that if we don't take the steps to do that now, that we're going to be left behind. Although right now, I've got to tell you, we're far ahead of many cities in what we are doing at this point in time. But I think we need to focus on that path, and I believe strongly that we can reduce the expenses significantly over time if we embrace those technologies that are available to us out there.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Just on point, I think the mayor makes a identifies an area I think we probably have to do a better job at. And I think that's drawing the line between the connection between the money we made in a smart grid system and exactly what that has meant on the personnel side. Because it's not like we've added, property taxes have stayed steady here. You would imagine that there's been a need over time to add personnel, and my guess is we've avoided having to do that by some of the other technological improvements that have been made. But this narrative doesn't talk about it, and I think we rarely identify within any of our published reports how 50 million on a smart grid system equated to X number of jobs that we haven't had to add by way of personnel.
Right, or any other technology that we've implemented.
Or any other, that's right, that's just one example. But because short of doing that, then it's just words when we say, we have an opportunity to save save the government on the efficiency side. Well, we can be challenged on that statement unless we can show that it's true.
Let us keep in mind, a small example, of course, is we have no more meter readers. That's very small, but it is the kind of savings that we can perceive or we can achieve in the future. And I think we have to look at this not as a short-term investment, because it is not. This is not a short-term investment. This is an investment in the future. This is an investment in the future of the city of Tallahassee and how it operates. This is not, you're not going to see a return on your investment in 1-2 years. The payback will probably be at 5, 6, 7-year increments. Probably maybe beyond the time that you all are on the commission, and certainly beyond the time that I'm going to be on the commission. So we have to get that mindset that no, we're not going to be able to show a definitive return in 1 year, 2 years, or maybe even 3 years. But I will almost guarantee you, from what I have observed, that this is going to happen. We know that the evolution in technology is happening, or revolution. We know it's happening. And if we don't do it, I would hate for us to be 10 years down the road and we say, wow, we should have done X. And we didn't, and we had the opportunity to do it. So that's where I'm coming from on this issue.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Gillum, anything further? I suppose staff has a pretty good idea of the things that we want to pursue. Our next one's, 2 weeks?
Yes.
2 weeks. Just very quickly, a point of just personal privilege here. I want to introduce the new executive director of our Council on Culture and Arts, Dr. Audra Pittman. Audra's here, and we appreciate you being here whenever we have folks that are being funded through this budget. It's nice to see them in the audience, so thank you, and we welcome you in your new position. Madam City Manager.
May I ask commissioners if there are things that we did not get on paper today? If you go back and have some thoughts later on, when we come back with our next workshop, it'll be with the need to have your specific guidance so that when we're on break, we can put together a budget that is a finalized budget. So any thoughts that you have, we appreciate you forwarding them.
Okay. Any other comments? Meeting adjourned.
Thank you for a well-run meeting.